Charleston didn't sleep that night. People pretended the city was calm, but anyone who heard the news felt something vicious, punched straight through their chest. A young woman walked out of a library, textbooks tucked under her arm, and a future so bright you'd swear it could set the whole street on fire. She was supposed to return to her apartment, finish a research assignment, and show up to class in the morning. Simple, normal, routine. Yet somehow, that short walk home swallowed her completely. No storm, no massive crowd, no violent protest. Just one stretch of road, dim streetlights, and a girl who never reached her front door. It angers people even now. How does someone so driven, so visible, so focused on justice, disappear on a weekday night without a single witness raising alarm? Charleston wasn't a huge city. People knew faces, recognized regulars, remembered who passed where and when. Someone saw her, someone knew something, and someone kept quiet. Maurine Bridger wasn't careless. She was cautious, observant, the type who didn't cross a street without assessing every detail around her. Even her friends trusted her instincts more than their own. And that's why people still feel sick thinking about her final steps. If someone like her could vanish, what chance did anyone else have? Rumors exploded instantly, whispers of jealousy, obsession, academic competition turned dark. A secret life no one knew about. Each theory scratched at the town's pride, daring anyone to defend themselves. Nobody could. The truth wasn't just missing. It felt stolen. Somewhere between the library doors and the apartment she shared with Skylar, Maurine's path was cut short. Someone decided her story would not continue. The question isn't how it happened. The question is who was bold enough to silence her. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy true crime stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. Maurine Bridger wasn't the type of person you forget. She walked into classrooms with the confidence of someone who knew exactly why she studied forensic chemistry. She wanted accountability, not a degree for decoration, not a career for money, but a purpose, exposing those who believed they could harm others and walk away untouched. She didn't just study justice. She lived like she was preparing to defend it. While others talked about grades, parties, and social circles, Maurine talked about how easy it was for criminals to exploit loopholes. She challenged professors when she believed procedures were outdated. She corrected classmates who cut corners during lab experiments. Some admired her determination, while others felt threatened by it. People respected her, but not everyone liked her. That kind of intensity doesn't blend in, it challenges the room. Her roommate, Skylar, often joked that Maurine didn't just watch crime documentaries. She paused them to criticize mistakes the investigators made. She took notes for fun. She debated forensic accuracy with students older than her. She didn't chase popularity. She chased integrity. But that strong moral stance created enemies without her trying. Those who lied, cheated, manipulated, or took credit for work they never did, hated how she exposed them with nothing more than sharp observation. Maurine believed justice shouldn't wait until after tragedy. She believed patterns of harmful behavior should be confronted early, before someone got hurt. That made her bold in the wrong people's eyes. It made her a problem for anyone with something to hide. So when she vanished, some mourned her absence. Others feared the questions that would follow. A girl dedicated to truth suddenly missing? It didn't feel random. It felt targeted. Almost as if someone wanted her voice quiet, before she uncovered something they couldn't afford to explain. On August 14, 2004, Maurine left the university library at 11:47 p.m. The cameras caught her walking out with her backpack strapped tight, her sweatshirt sleeves pulled over her hands, like she was bracing against the humid night air. She looked tired but focused. The kind of exhaustion that comes from solving problems no one else notices. She didn't stop to chat with anyone. She didn't linger. She walked with intention, like she had one thing left to finish before calling it a night. The footage showed her turning toward the parking lot, where her old silver Honda sat under a flickering street light. She was alone, or at least that's how it appears. No strange figures, no frantic movements, no car speeding by. Just Maurine stepping into the shadows at the edge of the lot. She should have reached her car in less than a minute, but there's no video showing her getting in. There's no footage of her driving away. It's as if she walked into a stretch of darkness and never returned. Campus security assumed she got home safely. After all, nothing looked wrong. She wasn't panicked. She wasn't being followed, at least not visibly. But here's where Charleston can't shake off its guilt. Someone was in that lot, and no one reviewed the footage until she was already gone for hours. A missing student should have triggered urgency. Instead, her last recorded moments sat untouched on a screen until it was too late to track who else might have been there. To this day, people still argue about what happened between the library exit and her parked car. Some say she was abducted before reaching it. Others whisper that she got there and met with someone she knew, someone she trusted, someone who didn't plan on letting her leave alive. Her final walk wasn't ordinary. It was the beginning of a truth someone desperately wanted to silence. If this case already has you wondering who would want Maurine gone, don't miss the clues ahead, stay with us till the end, and subscribe so you never miss cases that expose what some people work hard to bury. The apartment felt wrong the moment Skylar opened her eyes. It wasn't just quiet. It was hollow. The kind of silence that doesn't wait for anyone to wake up because nothing new is coming. No sharp joke from Maurine about Skylar's messy desk. No sarcastic comment about how sleep is human hibernation for the unproductive. The morning air held nothing. By 8:03 a.m., Skylar should have heard the familiar grind of coffee beans. Maurine never missed it. Not once, even on exam days. Even when she was sick, even when she'd barely slept. She brewed it like a ritual. But the kitchen counter was clean. The coffee grinder untouched. The mug she always used still dry in the rack. Skylar stared at it like she was waiting for it to move on its own. Maurine also called her grandmother every morning, at around this same time. A routine Skylar used to tease her about. Who calls family daily unless they're preparing for retirement? Maurine would roll her eyes. Claim relationships needed maintenance like lab instruments. She believed consistency was love. Skylar checked the phone on the table, no call made. Not even an attempt. Something fundamental was missing. At first, Skylar told herself Maurine might have slept over at the lab to finish a project. Maybe she crashed on a bench after a long night of work. But doubt grew fast. Maurine always left a message when she was running late. Always. Skylar picked up her own phone, scrolled for notifications, checked for texts. Nothing. Not a single word. The apartment wasn't peaceful. It was abandoned by someone who never leaves things unfinished. Maurine's routines weren't broken accidentally. They were stolen, and Skylar felt it without proof, without explanation, without warning. Something had cut into their life overnight, and whatever changed wasn't coming undone on its own. Skylar moved through the apartment slowly, as if any sudden movement might disturb something she wasn't ready to face. Maurine's door stood slightly open, not unusual. She often left it like that to let her brain air out, as she joked. But the room felt paused, frozen mid-thought. Her laptop sat open on the desk. Its screen dimmed but still alive, displaying a half-finished report about chemical trace evidence. She hadn't logged out. She hadn't closed anything. She planned to return to it. Her wallet was on the dresser, all her cards still inside. Cash still folded exactly the way she kept it. Next to it, her keys lay untouched, with the metal lab access tag still clipped on. The charger she always took, everywhere, missing only when she was carrying it, was still plugged into the outlet by her bed. Even her backpack was leaning against the chair, zipper open, waiting to be repacked. Nothing about this room looked like the space of someone planning to go anywhere except back into her routine. Skylar's breath grew tight. People who walk away take their essentials. They take identity, transportation, connection. Maurine left behind everything she used to exist in the world. There was no chaos, no rushed exit, no signs of distraction. It was as if someone pressed pause on her life without her permission. On the nightstand sat one more detail. A sticky note marked with reminders for the next day: lab prep at 9, tutoring at 2, dinner study group at 7. Tasks lined up neatly, all expecting her. Every plan she made assumed she'd return. Nothing in that room belonged to a runaway. It belonged to someone interrupted mid-sentence. Skylar didn't need proof to know Maurine hadn't left her life willingly. The evidence wasn't loud, it was obvious. Someone else stopped her before she ever made it home. By mid-morning, Skylar was on the phone with the Charleston Police Department, desperation seeping into every word. She hasn't called. She hasn't texted. She isn't here, she said, her voice trembling. The line on the other end offered polite reassurance, almost rehearsed. Students often disappeared for a day or two. Maybe Maurine needed space. Maybe she'd fallen asleep at the library. Maybe she'd just decided to take a walk. Skylar wanted to scream. This wasn't a teenager skipping town. This was Maurine Bridger. Careful, disciplined, someone who planned every hour of her life. Nothing about her personality suggested she would vanish willingly. Despite her pleas, the initial response was minimal. Officers jotted down her name, her roommate's account, a description of the apartment's untouched state, and promised a follow-up. Skylar felt frustration, like a physical weight pressing into her chest. They didn't see what she did. They didn't feel the absence of coffee, the silence of the phone, the paused life in Maurine's room. They were treating a tragedy as routine paperwork. Determined, Skylar began printing missing Maurine Bridger posters. She pinned them on every bulletin board she could reach, taping them to lampposts, bus stops, and coffee shop windows. Her hands shook while pasting her friend's smiling face onto the public eye. Knowing the image only hinted at what was lost. The posters felt like a lifeline, fragile and exposed, waiting for anyone to notice. Hours stretched. Calls went unanswered. Leads didn't appear. Every moment without recognition from the authorities twisted Skylar's panic tighter. Yet beneath the panic was clarity. Something was wrong. Something terrible. The calm dismissal from police did nothing to ease the dread settling over the apartment, the building, the city. In the background, a detective reviewed the initial statements, catching details that everyone else had ignored. Skylar didn't know it yet, but someone in uniform understood. Maurine Bridger hadn't run away. She had been taken. And the city's heartbeat skipped a little as that truth began to emerge. Detective Roland Kincaid arrived at the scene with the quiet weight of experience pressing on his shoulders. He moved slowly through Maurine's apartment, observing without judgment, letting the silence speak. He noticed the laptop left open, the untouched wallet, the charger still plugged in, small details most would overlook. To anyone else, it was a missing student, perhaps a temporary absence. To Kincaid, it was a red flag screaming in the quiet. He asked Skylar the usual questions, but his mind tracked patterns others didn't see. A missing morning call. Coffee untouched. No signs of hurried exit. He visualized every possible scenario, testing them against the evidence, but nothing matched the ordinary explanation. He knew this wasn't a choice. He knew Maurine hadn't left. Someone had intervened. The meticulous order of her life left behind didn't belong to a runaway. It belonged to someone who had been stopped before she could finish her day. Kincaid's eyes lingered on the sticky notes, the plans scrawled in her neat handwriting. Each item, a promise of tomorrow. A tutoring session, lab work, a quiet dinner with Skylar. Each step expected to be executed. The interruption of these plans gnawed at him, a professional intuition mingling with personal empathy. He had seen the same patterns before. Precise, deliberate disruption, a life halted mid-routine, a disappearance designed to confuse and delay investigation. The air felt heavy with absence, the apartment echoing the weight of a missing person that authorities often misread. By the time Kincaid stepped back into the hallway, his mind had already shifted gears. This was no ordinary missing person. The fear, the uncertainty, the silence, all signs pointed to a victim, not someone who had chosen to vanish. Somewhere out there, a choice had been made against Maurine. And for the first time, the city's law enforcement understood the depth of what they were facing. Justice had a long road ahead, and Kincaid could feel the anger, the heartbreak, and the urgency settling into him like an unshakable promise. Maurine Bridger would not be forgotten. The city of Charleston stirred differently that week. It wasn't just the August heat pressing down, it was a tension that refused to lift. Flyers reading "Missing Maurine Bridger" appeared on every bulletin board, streetlight, and shop window Skylar could reach. Each image of Maurine's smiling face was a reminder that someone they all knew had vanished without a trace. Residents whispered in grocery stores, barbershops, and coffee lines, the city's heartbeat quickening in collective unease. Vigils formed spontaneously in the evenings. Students, neighbors, and strangers gathered, lighting candles and leaving notes, flowers, and small tokens at the university gates. The quiet of the night was broken by sobs, murmured prayers, and the rhythmic tapping of footsteps as groups of people moved together through the campus paths. Skylar, her own grief sharpened by fear, guided friends and acquaintances through the streets, ensuring no area went unchecked, no sighting went unnoticed. Her dedication was a lighthouse in the fog of worry. Local news crews arrived, cameras following Skylar and other volunteers as they spoke about Maurine's disappearance. Interviews captured trembling voices recounting her intelligence, humor, and kindness. Televised segments repeated her name into living rooms across the state, forcing families to confront the reality that this bright, determined young woman was gone. The media spotlight magnified the community's fear, but it also ignited a sense of urgency, a desperate desire to act, to find, to correct what had gone wrong. Every corner of Charleston began to feel the emptiness of Maurine's absence. Parents called children home early. Friends stayed awake late, scanning streets and alleyways. The city no longer moved with its usual rhythm. It now pulsed with worry, with tension, with the knowledge that someone had disappeared, and that someone might be watching, waiting, and capable of keeping her hidden. By mid-morning, the city's urgency had transformed into action. Volunteers fanned out in groups, spanning sidewalks, parks, and riverbanks. Each step they took echoed with hope and fear, a rhythm of desperation that carried through the quiet neighborhoods. Skylar led many of these groups, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning every shadow, every corner, every path Maurine might have walked. Her heart pounded with each call she made. Each face she searched for recognition, as though she could will Maurine back with sheer persistence. The river trail became a focal point, its gravel path stretching alongside murmuring waters. Volunteers combed through thick undergrowth and overgrown banks, fingers brushing against brambles and cold stone, eyes darting for any glint that might signal a clue. Some carried flashlights, despite the day's brightness, a ritual born of fear and superstition. Murmurs of reassurance were exchanged. Yet beneath the surface of every conversation was anxiety, the silent acknowledgement that time was slipping, and Maurine's presence remained nowhere. The emotional weight pressed on every volunteer. Tears stained cheeks, and hands shook with both adrenaline and despair. Every discarded bottle or piece of litter sparked a wave of hope, each time crushed by realization that it was irrelevant. The community shared grief in a way that stitched them together, each person silently affirming the same thought. They could not, they must not, give up. Skylar's determination was relentless. She refused to let inaction define the day. With every poster she handed out, every group she guided, every area she scoured, she forged a network of vigilant citizens, each invested in uncovering what had happened. Hope wove through their exhaustion, sharp and painful, compelling them to search relentlessly. Maurine's absence became a tangible force, pulling at the city, urging action, demanding attention, and refusing to let the community forget her. It was late afternoon when a volunteer stumbled upon it. A small glint caught the sun near the river trail, half hidden in the dirt and underbrush. Kneeling, the woman's fingers trembled as she uncovered a silver earring, shaped in a Celtic knot, delicate and intricate. At first, she thought it belonged to someone else. Lost, ordinary, a child's trinket perhaps. But the moment she held it closer, the weight of it, the familiarity of its design, pressed into her chest with an intensity she hadn't anticipated. Word spread instantly. Skylar's phone buzzed with messages and calls from volunteers who had gathered along the river, their voices heavy with urgency. Every eye that caught sight of the earring recognized its significance. The unmistakable connection to Maurine. She had worn this piece daily, a gift from her grandmother, a token of heritage and sentimentality. Its presence there, abandoned yet carefully preserved, twisted the stomach of anyone who saw it. Detective Kincaid, now called back into action, held the earring with gloved hands, eyes narrowing. This was no ordinary lost item. The earring was a fragment of Maurine's life, deliberately or accidentally left behind, signaling something that words could not capture. For the first time, the disappearance had physical proof. Maurine had been somewhere, touched by someone else, and her absence was no longer abstract. The tension thickened. Volunteers whispered questions, theories, fears, and prayers, while Skylar fought to keep her composure. The realization settled over everyone present. The missing student's story was shifting into a darker territory. Someone had taken Maurine, and this small, delicate object was either a clue, a taunt, or a warning. The community's heartbeat quickened as the questions multiplied, the earring serving as both connection and threat, proof and puzzle. The search had produced its first terrifying breakthrough. If you want to see how this mystery unfolds and justice is finally served, make sure to like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and comment below. Your engagement keeps these stories alive. The earring was sent immediately to the forensic lab. Every movement of it was handled with reverent caution, each step a reminder of what was at stake. When the results returned, the confirmation struck like lightning. The hair strand clinging to the clasp belonged to Maurine Bridger. The city's fear deepened, and the volunteers' hope curdled into a sharper, more urgent anxiety. This was no longer just a missing student. This was proof that she had been somewhere she shouldn't, with someone who had removed her from safety. Yet the breakthrough also brought frustration. The DNA on the earring did not match anyone in the original investigation files. No known acquaintances, no friends, no family. It was an unknown, a shadow from the past, a reminder that the perpetrator had walked free all these years, hidden in plain sight. Every lead that had seemed solid suddenly felt fragile, slipping through the fingers of those desperate for answers. Skylar's grief sharpened, a knife edged with anger. Her hands shook as she held the earring, a physical reminder of Maurine's absence and the time lost. Every question she had asked, every knock she had made, every call she had placed, felt magnified in its importance now. The city collectively felt the weight of the unanswered question. Who had done this, and why? And then came the chilling thought that gripped the minds of those investigating. Was the earring intentionally placed near the river trail? A taunt, a warning, or simply a careless oversight? The uncertainty gnawed at them. Someone had inserted themselves into Maurine's life, disrupted it permanently, and left this delicate trace behind as a silent message. The tension in Charleston mounted, the unanswered questions pressing on everyone's nerves. Eyes darted toward the shadows along the river, hearts clenched with both fear and anticipation. The mystery had deepened, and the city braced for the next revelation, knowing that the truth was waiting somewhere, just out of reach. If you want to see how this chilling case takes a turn and justice finally emerges, like, subscribe, and comment below. Join the community uncovering the truth. Skylar's voice trembled as she recounted the night Maurine vanished. Every sentence seemed weighted with guilt, grief, and the desperate need to remember perfectly, even as her mind faltered. The small details she clung to: lights left on, doors closed. The faint hum of the refrigerator felt monumental, like clues in a puzzle she feared she couldn't solve. Her memory twisted under the pressure of panic. Moments blurred, time shifted, gestures misremembered, yet every inaccuracy was honest, born not of deceit but of trauma that clouded perception. Detective Kincaid listened patiently, scanning the room for truths hidden between fractured recollections. Skylar described Maurine's final moments in the apartment, the empty coffee cup she never made, the unanswered call to her grandmother, and the meticulous order in which everything remained. Each item was a testament to Maurine's routine, a routine shattered in silence. Kincaid noted inconsistencies, yet none that suggested malicious intent. Schuyler's panic had woven its own pattern, creating a narrative that was both vivid and incomplete. The emotional weight of her testimony was palpable. Kincaid felt it in the way Schuyler's hands clenched and unclenched, in the stifled sobs she fought to contain. Her loyalty to Maurine pushed her to over-explain, to fill gaps with conjecture, and to relive the terror over and over. Every phrase she uttered was a reminder of the human cost behind the investigation, the grief, the uncertainty, the relentless questioning that left loved ones raw. Through Schuyler, the detective glimpsed the depth of Maurine's impact on those around her. The loss was not only of a student, a friend, a roommate, it was of hope, of certainty, of safety within familiar walls. And yet, despite Schuyler's fractured narrative, one thing remained painfully clear. Maurine had been taken, and the trail to her remained invisible, leaving a community haunted by unanswered questions. Asher Vance, quiet and methodical, became a focal point simply because he had been the last person to see Maurine alive at the library. His demeanor was calm, almost detached, but his eyes betrayed the unease of someone forced to relive a night he could not change. He recounted leaving the library an hour before Maurine, driving straight home, his route documented by toll booths and bank transactions. Each point was verifiable, each step corroborated by digital records that were not available in 2004, but painstakingly reconstructed for the investigation. Detective Kincaid pressed, asking for precise details. How long it took to exit the campus, whether he had noticed anyone unusual, whether he had taken the same roads as usual. Asher answered carefully, leaving nothing to doubt yet revealing the strain of recounting events from memory 2 decades prior. The detective checked and double-checked every timestamp, every witness who might have intersected with Asher's route. Nothing contradicted his story. Frustration gnawed at the edges of the investigation. The last person seen alive was not a suspect. The tension tightened in Kincaid's chest, knowing that this lead, seemingly so crucial, had reached a dead end. Still, Asher's presence reminded the community of the lingering uncertainty. His proximity to Maurine's disappearance was undeniable, and whispers of suspicion floated in the air despite clear evidence. Friends and neighbors debated in hushed tones, each replaying imagined scenarios that cast him in shadows, unable to reconcile reality with fear. Kincaid felt the pressure of public expectation pressing down. People demanded answers, a culprit, and closure. But for now, Asher's alibi stood firm, a barrier to resolution, leaving the detective staring once more at the growing list of unanswered questions. The case, Kincaid realized, was less about clear suspects and more about searching for a thread that could withstand the years. Every dead end pushed him deeper into frustration and the grim certainty that the path to Maurine was obscured, shrouded by time, and by the meticulous concealment of someone who had vanished into the background of the city. Dr. Leland Beck, known for his sharp tongue and exacting expectations, became a figure of suspicion almost by default. His demanding nature and occasional brusque comments toward students painted him as someone who could harbor resentment, someone whose temper might conceivably escalate into danger. Kincaid and his team questioned him extensively, each session probing for cracks in his story, for inconsistencies that might suggest involvement. Yet, as the interviews unfolded, it became clear that the professor's alibi was solid. Every claim was backed by colleagues, every movement accounted for at the time Maurine disappeared. The police initially found the line of inquiry compelling because Dr. Beck had been present at a mandatory department dinner miles from the campus late that night. Witnesses confirmed his attendance. Photographs and time-stamped receipts corroborated his presence. Despite his abrasive personality, there was no evidence tying him to the disappearance. Still, the lingering suspicion surrounding him reflected the city's desperation, the collective desire to find a culprit, anyone to fill the void left by Maurine's absence. Kincaid felt the weight of dead end after dead end pressing on him. Each promising lead seemed to dissolve under scrutiny, leaving only fragments of fear and speculation. Dr. Beck's case illustrated the peril of assumptions, how character traits could be misread as motive, how human instinct to assign blame could cloud reason. The professor, with all his flaws, was innocent, and yet the community's imagination had already painted him otherwise. In the end, Dr. Beck was exonerated, but the impact lingered. The town's paranoia deepened, now unconsciously trained to suspect even the familiar faces around them. Kincaid returned to the evidence board, eyes resting on the photograph of the silver Celtic knot earring, untouched by suspicion, yet carrying the weight of all unanswered questions. The sense of helplessness thickened proof existed, but it pointed nowhere. For Maurine, for the investigators, and for Charleston, the case remained suspended in a limbo of fear, suspicion, and unresolved grief. The investigation returned repeatedly to the earring, the fragile silver knot that had first signaled Maurine's absence. It sat under glass in the police evidence room, a small object that carried the weight of 20 years of unanswered questions. Despite advances in forensic methods and countless interviews, it yielded nothing new: no fingerprints, no trace DNA, no connection to any known person. Kincaid stared at its delicate curves, each loop a silent mockery of his frustration. The longer the case lingered without resolution, the more the community's fear deepened. Every dead end in the investigation reverberated outward, infecting the city with doubt. Friends whispered suspicions about neighbors, classmates nervously eyed one another, and casual conversations in coffee shops carried undertones of paranoia. The sense that danger could be closer than anyone realized, that someone ordinary could hide the unthinkable, gripped Charleston. Even those far removed from Maurine's immediate circle found themselves questioning the people around them, their assumptions fraying under the weight of uncertainty. Kincaid, fatigued and burdened by 2 decades of unanswered questions, kept returning to the simplest piece of evidence: the earring, its placement, its preservation, its isolation. All pointed to someone careful, someone who understood that leaving a trace could be both a mistake and a message. Yet it revealed nothing of the perpetrator's identity. Frustration and helplessness became constant companions, pressing on every thought, every decision, every theory that crossed his mind. The community waited, simultaneously clinging to hope and sinking into despair. The earring's image circulated in newspapers, online forums, and local discussions, a constant reminder of the void left in Maurine's absence. Kincaid's eyes lingered on the photograph late into the night, the metallic gleam reflecting both determination and resignation. The case was far from over. Yet at that moment, the city and its protectors were trapped by circumstance, by time, and by the cleverness of someone who had vanished, without leaving a story that could easily be read. As the weeks turned into months, the once vivid missing person flyers of Maurine Bridger began to fade under the relentless West Virginia sun. The crimson letters softened to pink, and the smiling face of the young student seemed to melt into the paper, just as hope for her safe return began to blur in the minds of Charleston's residents. The initial panic that had gripped the community gave way to frustration and quiet resentment. Conversations about Maurine shifted from urgency to lamentation, whispers of what could have been, of missteps, and of the unknown person responsible. The university campus, once alive with vigil gatherings and poster campaigns, fell into a muted rhythm. Students continued their studies, families returned to their routines, but an undercurrent of unease remained. Parents drove their children to campus with heightened caution, and neighbors watched streets more closely, each glance carrying suspicion. The absence of answers had created a vacuum, and in that vacuum, imagination filled the gaps with fear. Despite the outward appearance of calm, the pain of Maurine's disappearance never fully dissipated. Small reminders, a forgotten backpack, an empty coffee cup would trigger recollections of that late August night. The community's collective grief hardened into impatience, a simmering frustration at the limitations of time, technology, and human effort. What had started as a shared mission to find Maurine was now tinged with disappointment, and a subtle fracture grew among neighbors who had once stood united. Detective Kincaid watched all of this from his office, noting the fading posters and the weary faces in the streets. He understood that the case had begun to freeze over, not with clarity, but with the cold weight of unresolved questions. The city was moving on, slowly, grudgingly, but he could not. The memory of Maurine's smile, her routine, and the trail left behind haunted him. A constant reminder that a young life had been stolen, and the answers remained locked in time. While the community's attention shifted elsewhere, Detective Roland Kincaid refused to release the grip the case had on him. The fading posters and hushed conversations outside his office walls did nothing to soften his resolve. Every morning, he returned to the evidence, reviewing the notes, photographs, and timelines as if retracing them could reverse the past. The silver Celtic knot earring sat in its evidence box, small and unassuming, yet heavy with unanswered questions. Kincaid's obsession was no longer about public approval. It was a personal promise to Maurine, a silent oath that justice would not be forgotten. Maurine Bridger, Maurine's grandmother, became both a source of pressure and a fragile ally in Kincaid's relentless pursuit. She arrived at the station regularly, carrying home-baked cookies to soften the tension, offering updates and leads she had gathered herself. Some were small, insignificant fragments, but Kincaid reviewed each with unwavering attention. Her determination was exhausting yet motivating, grief-driven vigilance that forced the detective to keep pushing, even when resources dwindled and departmental support waned. The emotional weight of this persistence was heavy. Kincaid's days and nights blurred as he balanced the life of a man nearing retirement with the relentless pull of a cold case that refused to die. Every unanswered question, every dead-end interview, and every subtle inconsistency in the records became a personal burden. While the world outside moved on, Kincaid remained tethered to the missing student, tracing the echoes of her life through fragments left behind. Through Ilara's tireless involvement and Kincaid's unyielding focus, the investigation survived the community's waning attention. The detective's office became a shrine to perseverance, a space where grief, duty, and determination converged. The case had frozen over for Charleston, but for Kincaid, it remained burning, an ember that refused to die, carrying the weight of a promise he would keep to the very end. Maurine Bridger transformed her grief into action. In the midst of despair, she established the Maurine Bridger Justice Fund, a public effort to ensure her granddaughter's disappearance would not be forgotten. The fund became more than a repository for resources. It became a symbol, a living reminder that Maurine's life, ambitions, and the unanswered questions surrounding her loss mattered. Flyers, press releases, and public appearances carried the message far beyond Charleston, keeping attention on a case that the city's daily life was gradually forgetting. Through the Justice Fund, Ilara maintained pressure on law enforcement and the broader community. She ensured that the story of Maurine's disappearance remained active in public consciousness, a challenge to complacency and a call to vigilance. Her tireless advocacy created a network of volunteers, donors, and concerned citizens who demanded accountability, keeping the conversation alive even as the streets grew quiet. The fund became a lifeline for families in similar situations, offering guidance, support, and hope in a world that too often moved on too quickly. Kincaid found unexpected allies in Ilara's determination. Her insights, observations, and tireless documentation provided leads and context that otherwise might have been lost. Though many of her tips were small, when combined with the detective's unwavering scrutiny, they kept the investigation moving incrementally forward. Together, their partnership was one of shared purpose, a delicate balance of professional analysis and emotional investment. The Justice Fund also served as a moral anchor for the community, a reminder that grief could be transformed into advocacy, and that persistence mattered even in the face of decades of silence. Ilara's unwavering presence became a light amid Charleston's quiet resignation, ensuring that Maurine's name continued to resonate. Her story remained alive, and the case did not dissolve into forgotten tragedy. Even as time stretched on, the fund symbolized hope, accountability, and the enduring promise that justice would be pursued, no matter how long it took. The weight of Maurine's disappearance settled into every corner of Charleston. Family gatherings were shadowed by loss, the absence of laughter from a niece, a granddaughter, a friend. The campus atmosphere, once bright with ambition and energy, carried a subtle tension that never fully lifted. Students whispered in corridors, their conversations punctuated by pauses of unease. Every familiar street corner, every late-night walk, reminded them that someone they trusted or at least didn't fear had violated the safety of their city. Alara's family felt the cumulative burden acutely. Sleepless nights, strained conversations, and the constant revisiting of unanswered questions gnawed at their spirits. The passage of time offered no comfort, only a growing awareness that life moved on elsewhere, while they remained suspended in a web of sorrow. Grief became a persistent companion, shaping decisions, interactions, and the very way they viewed the world. Detective Kincaid, observing the community's quiet descent into resignation, understood that he too was trapped in the aftermath. The case had consumed him, defined his final years on the force, and refused to release its grip. Every piece of evidence, every note in the file, every observation he had recorded over 2 decades lingered in his mind. Retirement loomed, yet the case remained unfinished, a shadow that could not be left behind. When the day finally arrived for Kincaid to step away from active duty, he handed the Bridger file to Detective Reese Denton, a promising but still inexperienced investigator. The transition was more than procedural. It was the passing of a torch, a final plea to someone younger, sharper, and unwearied by decades of unanswered questions. Kincaid's parting words carried urgency and weight. The case must not be forgotten. The truth must be pursued. For Charleston, for Maurine, and for the community still haunted by her absence, the promise of persistence continued, now entrusted to a new generation of law enforcement ready to pick up where the last had faltered. 2 decades passed, and Charleston no longer resembled the city of Maurine Bridger's disappearance. The old university library had been updated with modern architecture. Streets were widened, and small businesses gave way to cafes and chain stores. Familiar landmarks shifted subtly, leaving only the memory of where events had once unfolded. For most residents, the disappearance had transformed into a story, a cautionary tale told to new students with hushed tones and wary eyes. The community moved forward, yet the echoes of that summer night lingered like a quiet hum. Parents instructed their children with a little more caution, neighbors cast fleeting glances toward dimly lit streets, and late-night walks carried a whisper of unease. The case had faded from newspaper headlines, local news segments, and daily conversation, replaced by fresher stories and more immediate concerns. Maurine's face, once printed on every bulletin board and lamppost, was now relegated to the worn pages of an archived file. Even as the city evolved, the absence of answers left a void. Families who had lived through the initial panic carried their private grief quietly, the silence of 2 decades stretching into a form of resignation. Friends who had searched tirelessly during the early weeks now offered polite nods to the memory, a recognition of loss and the limitations of human effort. And yet, the case never truly ended. For the few who had refused to let go, it remained alive in quiet persistence, a ghost that followed footsteps and lingered in the corners of offices. Though Charleston appeared to have healed on the surface, shadows of the unresolved hung over certain streets, certain faces, and certain minds. The city's evolution was undeniable, but Maurine Bridger's story waited silent, patient, and poised for the moment when attention, technology, and determination would collide once more. Detective Reese Denton, once the eager officer handed the Bridger file, grew into a seasoned chief detective, shaped in no small part by the weight of that unresolved case. Each promotion, each commendation, carried with it the quiet reminder of a promise he had made 2 decades earlier, to never let Maurine Bridger be forgotten. While younger colleagues moved on from old cases, Denton kept her story alive in the corners of his mind, a constant presence behind every decision and strategy. The case file, now worn and frayed, sat prominently in his office. Notes, photographs, timelines, and correspondences had accumulated over the years, each layer a testament to years of persistence. Denton treated it not as a relic but as a living dossier, regularly reviewing it in the hopes that new connections or overlooked details might surface. His personal life, while outwardly normal, bore subtle signs of the case's influence. Dinner conversations occasionally interrupted by thoughts of missed leads, vacations shortened by the need to consult archived evidence, and casual encounters with locals sparking questions about past residents. While the world outside moved forward, Denton's dedication became a measure of both professional responsibility and moral obligation. His team respected him, understanding that the Bridger case had shaped not only his methods but his reputation. Mentoring younger detectives, he emphasized diligence, patience, and the importance of following a lead, no matter how small, often citing the Bridger file as a lesson in perseverance. Through all these years, Denton's commitment never wavered. He carried the burden of unanswered questions like a shadow at his back, a constant reminder that a young life had been stolen and the truth remained hidden. The city might have believed the case was frozen in time, but for Denton, Maurine Bridger's memory burned brightly, guiding his steps and ensuring that justice, however delayed, remained a goal worth pursuing. Over the years, every advancement in forensic technology brought a new wave of hope for Detective Denton. Each innovation, more sensitive DNA testing, refined fingerprint analysis, even early familial searching, offered a chance to finally close the gap between unanswered questions and certainty. Yet each attempt returned the same frustrating result: inconclusive. The evidence, small and fragile, resisted every modern method, leaving the team staring at screens that confirmed only what they already knew. The silver Celtic knot earring, long preserved in evidence, became the focal point of this technological pursuit. Every microscopic residue, every hair or speck collected in 2004, was analyzed with precision instruments that Denton's predecessors could only dream of using. For years, the tests revealed nothing beyond Maurine's own presence. There was no foreign DNA, no fingerprints, no trace of the person who had altered her life forever. It was as if the evidence itself was waiting, patient, challenging investigators to find the method capable of unmasking the truth. The emotional parallel between human perseverance and technological evolution was stark. While laboratories across Charleston and the nation produced tools of extraordinary precision, the past refused to yield. Denton watched methods improve, watched machines detect one molecule in a million, and yet still the mystery endured. Each failed result was a reminder of how fragile hope could be, how easily time could conceal the truth behind layers of absence. Despite the repeated setbacks, Denton never allowed discouragement to dictate action. He reviewed each report, consulted with colleagues, and cataloged even the smallest anomalies. Each inconclusive result became a promise to keep trying, a signal that evidence, no matter how small, might one day speak. And as the years passed, one persistent truth remained clear: the case was far from finished, and the moment of revelation, though delayed, was quietly approaching. In the spring of 2024, a new chapter began without fanfare. Forensic analyst Nova Collins, known for her expertise in advanced DNA phenotyping and familial searching, was assigned to re-examine the Bridger case evidence. Unlike any technology available in 2004, her methods could detect the faintest genetic traces, separate overlapping materials, and analyze samples previously considered too degraded or insignificant. For the first time in 2 decades, the investigation was poised on the edge of breakthrough. Nova focused on the silver Celtic knot earring, the only item to yield any forensic potential. The tiny strand of hair adhering to its clasp had been previously consumed in initial tests, but additional residues, dust, fibers, and microscopic particles had been carefully preserved, awaiting the day technology could reveal their secrets. Nova's precision instruments, capable of isolating single molecules and reconstructing minute DNA fragments, promised to do what years of conventional testing could not. Detective Denton, now seasoned but never less vigilant, watched the process unfold with restrained anticipation. Each sample extraction, each analytical step, carried the weight of hope for closure. the possibility of finally identifying the person responsible for altering the course of a young life. 20 years of silence had left the community emotionally scarred. One successful analysis could break decades of tension, fear, and unanswered questions. The tension was almost unbearable. Every movement in the lab, every reading on the monitor, seemed amplified by the weight of history. The city, largely unaware, continued its rhythms, oblivious to the fact that the story of Maurine Bridger was on the brink of awakening. As Nova prepared to initiate the advanced extraction process, Detective Denton held his breath. The audience senses it too, the moment when patience, perseverance, and technology converge. One careful, deliberate test could shift the case from 2 decades of frustration to the first real lead in 20 years. The quiet hum of the lab became a heartbeat, signaling that the silence might finally be broken. Nova Collins approached the Bridger case with a calm intensity honed by years of working with the most challenging forensic evidence. Her specialty was YSTR profiling, a method designed to trace genetic markers passed down exclusively through the male line. Unlike standard DNA tests, which could confirm identity only when a direct match existed, YSTR profiling allowed investigators to identify familial relationships, uncovering links between distant male relatives, even when the suspect himself had never been previously tested. For the Bridger investigation, this method represented a seismic shift. In 2004, the hair collected from the Celtic knot earring had been subjected to the best available mitochondrial DNA testing. That test had confirmed it belonged to Maurine, but offered no clue about any intruder. For 2 decades, every new DNA technique had been applied to the evidence, yet each attempt ended in frustration. Conventional testing could not reveal what YSTR profiling could potentially uncover: a hidden paternal connection pointing directly to a family tree. Nova's confidence came from experience, and the knowledge that, even in tiny, overlooked traces, evidence could reveal a story years after a crime. The tiny flecks of microscopic residue, clinging to the intricate grooves of the earring, were now her focus. Each fragment, invisible to the naked eye, held the possibility of opening a door that had remained locked for 20 years. Detective Denton observed the process, aware that every precise movement, every calculated chemical reaction, could finally illuminate the shadowy path of the perpetrator. For the first time since Maurine disappeared, the case seemed to pulse with potential. YSTR profiling was not just a technique, it was the key that could transform decades of silence into actionable insight. And as the lab lights reflected off the earring, both Denton and Nova sensed that the investigation was no longer looking for a completely unknown suspect. The shadows were about to be pierced. The hair from 2004 had long been consumed in the initial mitochondrial DNA testing, leaving no trace for modern investigators to examine. Yet Nova Collins refused to accept defeat. Carefully, she turned her attention to what had been preserved: microscopic residue collected from the earring's intricate grooves. Dust, fibers, and nearly invisible fragments had been saved with painstaking care, a decision dismissed by some at the time as excessive. Now, 2 decades later, that tiny remnant of evidence carried the weight of hope. Under the sterile hum of the lab, Nova and her team began the delicate extraction process. Every particle had to be treated as if it held the key to unlocking the entire case. Using highly sensitive chemical solutions and laser-guided instruments, they separated foreign material from environmental contamination. The work required patience, precision, and an unwavering focus on the possibility that any misstep could destroy the last chance of breakthrough. Detective Denton, observing from a nearby station, felt a tension he hadn't experienced in years. Each minute of progress, each successful separation of residue, brought the distant memory of Maurine Bridger into sharp relief. The earring, once just a tragic token of loss, now served as a silent messenger, carrying evidence of a man who had evaded detection for 20 years. Hours stretched into an almost unbearable waiting game. The lab team monitored every reaction, every fluctuation in their analytical readouts. And then, a pattern began to emerge: a series of genetic markers, faint but distinct, that hinted at a male contributor. The small sample that had been overlooked for decades was speaking again, whispering a secret long concealed. For the first time in 20 years, the investigation had a tangible lead. It was no longer a matter of speculation or hope. The case could finally pivot from cold uncertainty to a path with direction. The audience feels it too, the suspense of revelation building, the tension of a breakthrough that might finally expose the person behind Maurine's disappearance. The extraction results revealed something that had eluded investigators for 20 years. A partial YSTR profile. The genetic markers, faint but unmistakable, indicated the presence of a male paternal line distinct from Maurine herself. For the first time, the evidence suggested that the perpetrator was no longer a faceless shadow. He was part of a family, connected by blood to others in the region. Detective Denton felt a mixture of relief and renewed intensity. The profile was incomplete, offering only partial information, yet it provided a direction, a thread to follow in a case that had been frozen for decades. The implication was profound. Investigators could now search family trees, track paternal connections, and identify potential suspects who shared these rare markers. The earring, once a silent relic of tragedy, had become a guidepost pointing toward the person responsible. Nova explained the limitations and possibilities to Denton and his team. The profile could not directly identify the killer, but it offered a high probability link to male relatives, opening investigative pathways unavailable in 2004. The breakthrough reshaped the entire case strategy. Old interviews, dismissed alibis, and previously overlooked names suddenly demanded fresh attention. Every detail, no matter how small, could now be re-examined with this new lens. Emotion rippled through the team. 2 decades of dead ends, frustration, and unanswered questions now gave way to tangible hope. The partial paternal profile transformed the cold case from a story of enduring loss into a live investigation. The earring, once a token of despair, had finally carried a message. The perpetrator was not beyond reach, and the truth could be drawn from the past. For viewers, the tension heightens here. After 20 years of silence, a whisper of evidence begins to form a clear signal. The killer's identity, long hidden in the shadows, may soon be revealed. The audience feels the first real shift from hopelessness to possibility, the anticipation mounting with each passing moment. Weeks of meticulous analysis culminated in a familial match. The partial YSTR profile extracted from the earring did not point directly to a perpetrator, but it led investigators to a relative, Jude Hatcher, a man currently serving time for a minor theft charge nearly 100 miles from Charleston. While Jude himself was not the direct source of the DNA, the connection provided a critical lead, narrowing the investigation from a faceless population to a single family tree with potential ties to the crime. Detective Denton immediately shifted focus to the Hatcher family. 20 years of frustration had distilled into this slender thread, a distant relative that could bridge the gap between decades-old evidence and a real suspect. The family connections were mapped, scrutinized, and cross-referenced with alibis, old police statements, and every detail previously dismissed. Suddenly, a man previously overlooked in 2004, a local delivery driver, rose from the background of the investigation with renewed significance. The discovery sent shockwaves through Denton's team. After 2 decades, the cold case had been given a pulse. Every piece of old evidence, every interview, every frustrated attempt at forensic analysis suddenly aligned under the new familial context. The silence that had blanketed Maurine Bridger's case was beginning to crack. For the first time in 20 years, there was a name, an anchor in a sea of uncertainty. Jude Hatcher's existence was more than a clue. It was a pathway, a living connection to the crime, and an opportunity to uncover the man who had evaded justice for so long. The audience is left on the edge of revelation. After 20 years of dead ends, the investigation now had a tangible lead, a single thread that could unravel decades of unanswered questions. The screen holds the tension. Who in the Hatcher family could have been responsible? The anticipation builds, and the viewers are compelled to stay, knowing that the breakthrough may finally bring the long-awaited confrontation. If you've been following Maurine's story, hit like, subscribe, and share this video. Let us know in the comments what you think the next shocking revelation will be. Jude Hatcher's name had been pulled from the shadows by the YSTR profile, but Detective Denton knew immediately he was not the perpetrator. The DNA pointed to a familial connection, a distant male relative, and nothing more. Yet this link was the breakthrough the case had been waiting for over 20 years. It was enough to breathe new life into the investigation, to turn decades of silence into a tangible direction. Tracing the Hatcher family in Charleston became the immediate priority. Genealogical records, old phone books, property documents, and archived Social Security data were scoured. Each thread, each connection, offered clues, not just about locations and timelines, but about patterns of behavior that might expose the man responsible for Maurine's disappearance. The detectives were no longer searching aimlessly, they were following bloodlines, mapping relationships, and reconsidering names previously written off. The emotional weight of the task was heavy. For 2 decades, Maurine's family had hoped, feared, and waited. Now, with a single DNA fragment, the investigation seemed poised to strike at the very heart of a family, uncovering secrets that had remained hidden for years. Denton felt the pressure mounting. The responsibility to translate this discovery into actionable leads was enormous. The distant relative was a key, but it would only work if every connection was carefully examined. Old police notes, archived interviews, and minor details from 2004 were pulled from the files and analyzed with fresh eyes. Every overlooked comment, every nervous gesture, every half-remembered interaction became potentially significant. For viewers, the tension rises. Jude Hatcher is no killer, yet his existence is the thread that finally unravels decades of uncertainty. The family tree is more than a record of names. It is the roadmap to the truth. Denton knows that someone among these branches holds the answers that Charleston has been waiting for, and the investigation is about to pivot sharply toward that revelation. As Denton's team mapped the Hatcher family, one name began to resurface with uncomfortable frequency: Wade Hatcher, a delivery driver for a local bakery in 2004. Wade's daily routes took him through the quiet streets where Maurine walked each night after the library. At the time, investigators had questioned him briefly. His alibi, a late-night baseball game, had seemed plausible, corroborated only by his own statements. Nervousness had been noted, but in the chaos of multiple leads and public pressure, his name had faded into the background. Now, with the familial DNA link guiding their focus, Wade could no longer be overlooked. Denton revisited the archived interviews, watching the old footage and reading transcripts with renewed scrutiny. Every hesitation, every stammer, every slight inconsistency in his answers carried new weight. What once appeared as the unease of a polite local man became a potential signal, a warning that he might have been hiding something far darker than anyone suspected. The detectives reconstructed his routes, cross-referencing his work schedule with Maurine's known movements. The proximity was striking. He had been within blocks of her apartment and the library on the night she disappeared. The tiny Celtic knot earring found by the river now took on a fresh significance. Could it have been dropped along his path, a remnant of a moment that had been ignored for years? The emotional gravity of the realization pressed on Denton. For 20 years, the killer had walked among them, ordinary and unremarkable. The quiet man behind the counter, delivering bread and pastries, may have been hiding a horrifying truth. Wade Hatcher was no longer just a name in a file. He was a person whose every action from that night demanded explanation. The audience feels the suspense tighten. The investigation pivots sharply, and every viewer is drawn into the realization. The long-awaited breakthrough is closer than anyone imagined. The next revelation could finally expose the man behind the decades of pain. Detective Denton sat alone in the dim glow of his office, the photo of Wade Hatcher pinned before him. 20 years earlier, Wade's alibi had seemed harmless: a late-night baseball game, a quiet night at home, but with the familial DNA breakthrough, every detail took on a new weight. Denton reviewed the transcript again, noting Wade's nervous gestures, the fleeting hesitation in his voice, the subtle contradictions dismissed as ordinary human error. Now, Those small cracks loomed like canyon walls in the case. The detectives reconstructed the night of Maurine's disappearance with fresh eyes. Wade's delivery route, previously considered routine, now mapped chillingly close to the paths Maurine took from the library. Every intersection, every quiet block, every dimly lit street suddenly gained significance. A simple trip for pastries and bread could have concealed a fleeting, terrifying encounter. The investigation shifted from theory to tangible possibility. The emotional toll pressed on Denton. For 2 decades, Maurine's disappearance had been a haunting absence in the lives of those who loved her. The possibility that Wade Hatcher had been in the vicinity, unchallenged and unnoticed, gnawed at the detective. Every forgotten lead, every dismissed tip, every assumption now demanded reconsideration. The cold case, once frozen in time, was alive again, and the stakes had never been higher. The audience is drawn into the rising tension. Questions swirl. Could the killer have been hiding in plain sight? Could the man who seemed so ordinary be the architect of this tragedy? Each moment of suspense tightens the narrative, keeping viewers on edge. Denton leaned back, staring at Wade's photo. A mixture of disbelief, anger, and grim determination crossing his features. He understood the implication. The breakthrough wasn't just about DNA or family trees. It was about the terrifying possibility that the man responsible had been walking the streets of Charleston for decades. And now, finally, the investigation could confront him. The cliffhanger hangs heavy. Denton knows the next move could finally bring closure or shock the community beyond comprehension. Wade Hatcher, in 2024, had built a life that seemed unremarkable to anyone passing by. He ran a modest hardware store in a quiet Charleston suburb, a place where locals stopped for nails, paint, or advice. He greeted each customer with a polite smile, offered small talk about the weather, and helped neighbors with home repairs without asking for anything in return. To the community, he was the embodiment of reliability, a man whose presence was steady, predictable, and entirely ordinary. Parents waved as their children walked past his storefront. Neighbors borrowed tools without hesitation. Wade's life radiated normalcy, a careful construction of everyday routine that left no room for suspicion. He mowed his lawn on Saturdays, greeted the mailman, and occasionally stopped to chat with an old friend at the corner coffee shop. To anyone looking superficially, he was the neighbor you trusted, the shop owner you knew by name, the man who could never be imagined capable of cruelty. But Detective Denton, staring at the old files, understood that appearances could deceive. Wade's calm, ordinary life was the perfect camouflage. The contrast between the decades of secrecy and the simplicity of his current existence was striking. How easily darkness could hide behind the mask of normality. The investigation's challenge was clear. The very qualities that made Wade appear safe were the same that allowed him to vanish into the community unnoticed for 20 years. For the audience, the tension begins to coil. The man who had delivered bread, repaired fences, and greeted neighbors with easy smiles could also be the man responsible for Maurine Bridger's disappearance. Every casual interaction now gains weight. Every glance, every step along familiar streets becomes suspect. Wade's ordinary life is the perfect stage for an extraordinary revelation, one that is about to pull the community into shock. Detective Denton's team moved carefully, aware that Wade Hatcher had spent 2 decades blending seamlessly into Charleston's quiet rhythm. Surveillance began subtly. Officers stationed in unmarked vehicles and on foot, tracking the flow of his daily life. Every movement was logged. The trips to the hardware store, the exchanges with customers, the short walks to check deliveries. Wade's gestures, polite and measured, seemed to reinforce the illusion of harmlessness, but the detectives knew better. Each routine was reconstructed meticulously. Denton's team compared current patterns with historical records, searching for anomalies, inconsistencies, or habits that could reveal a hidden truth. Interviews with neighbors provided ordinary anecdotes. A man who returned a lost wallet, who helped hang a neighbor's mailbox, who was always courteous. To the casual observer, Wade was nothing more than a dependable member of the community. Yet, every glance from Wade toward the camera, every small hesitation as he walked past an officer in plain clothes, was logged and analyzed. The detectives felt the weight of watching a man who seemed so ordinary, yet carried decades of unanswered questions. The emotional tension was heavy. How do you confront someone who has woven himself flawlessly into the fabric of everyday life? For the audience, the suspense intensifies. Wade's simple gestures now carried dual meaning. A smile can conceal guilt. A nod can mask decades of secrecy. Every moment of calm routine contrasts sharply with the horrific potential lurking just beneath. The investigation was no longer about assumptions or leads. It was about reading behavior, patterns, and human nuance to catch the man who had evaded justice for 20 years. The stage is set. Observers and detectives alike hold their breath, knowing that this quiet, ordinary man may soon face the truth he has hidden for far too long. The next breakthrough could change everything. The investigation took a sharp turn when modern technology was applied to the most overlooked detail from 2004. Wade Hatcher's flip phone records. At the time, the data was rudimentary, barely enough to confirm general locations. Today, with advanced triangulation methods, even a single ping could reveal a crucial movement. Denton's team fed the archived records into new software, reconstructing every signal the phone had emitted on the night Maurine disappeared. The process was painstaking. Officers mapped the cell tower connections against known locations, searching for anomalies any moment where Wade's phone deviated from its expected path. Hours passed in tense silence, the team aware that decades of unanswered questions rested on a tiny digital footprint. Then it appeared. A brief, anomalous ping at 11:58 p.m., just 11 minutes after Maurine was last seen on campus. The location? The abandoned bakery storage unit, a place Wade had maintained for years, ostensibly for inventory. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. A man who had walked freely in the neighborhood for 20 years had, at that precise moment, been at a site previously unconnected to the case. The eerie precision of the ping, combined with the familial DNA link, shifted the investigation from circumstantial to targeted. Every officer in the room understood the gravity. This was not a coincidence. For the audience, the tension skyrockets. The ordinary neighbor, the dependable hardware store owner, was now directly tied to a place of chilling significance. The tools of modern forensics had illuminated a shadow of the past, exposing a path long hidden in time. Detective Denton leaned forward, eyes fixed on the screen, heartbeat echoing the mounting urgency. The evidence was undeniable. Wade Hatcher had been at the abandoned storage unit at the exact moment Maurine vanished. The cliffhanger hangs, the stage is set, the trap ready, and the quiet man's carefully constructed life teeters on the brink of exposure. If you're shocked by this discovery, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell. Don't miss the shocking confrontation coming next. Detective Denton's hands trembled slightly as he held the search warrant. The culmination of 20 years of unanswered questions, dead ends, and faint glimmers of hope. Every word on the document carried the weight of decades. Probable cause, evidence, familial DNA links, and cell phone triangulation. For the first time, the investigation had a tangible target. Wade Hatcher, the unassuming hardware store owner, was finally facing scrutiny that decades of ordinary life could not hide from. The team assembled quietly outside the storage unit, their breaths shallow, each aware that this entry could either provide closure or extend the nightmare. The building loomed like a relic of time, paint peeling, metal doors dulled and scarred from years of neglect. Denton's heart thudded, the rhythm echoing the collective anxiety of officers who had inherited a case long dormant, yet deeply personal. No one spoke. The weight of anticipation was a palpable presence. Every step forward was measured, deliberate. Officers positioned themselves strategically, flashlights in hand, ready for any unexpected resistance. The simple act of turning the lock, of pulling the heavy door open, was imbued with significance, the threshold between decades of silence and the truth that had been waiting in shadowed corners. As the door creaked, dust motes danced in the weak sunlight filtering through rusted slats. The air inside was heavy with neglect, the scent of old wood, damp concrete, and stale industrial residue. Each step into the storage unit intensified the tension, the familiar sounds of city life fading behind them. The team moved cautiously, every sense alert. For the audience, the suspense is immediate. The long wait, the ordinary life masking decades of darkness, all converging on this single space. What lay beyond the door had the potential to answer questions, to deliver justice, and to finally give Maurine Bridger a place in the world where she had been absent for far too long. The storage unit swallowed the team in darkness, the faint light from their flashlights cutting jagged beams through years of dust and neglect. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of stale grain, mildew, and cold metal. Every footstep echoed against the concrete floor, a hollow reminder of the isolation of this forgotten place. Shadows clung to corners, stretching across stacks of rotting flour sacks and broken shelving, turning ordinary objects into menacing shapes. Detective Denton's pulse quickened as he scanned the space. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the scraping of shoes and the soft hum of distant traffic outside. Dust particles drifted lazily in the flashlight beams, settling slowly, as though the room itself was holding its breath. The years of ordinariness that Wade Hatcher had maintained crumbled here, replaced by the tangible presence of what had been hidden. Every object was inspected carefully. Crates, boxes, discarded equipment, remnants of a life that appeared normal to the casual observer. The team's movements were deliberate, slow, the weight of decades of unanswered questions pressing down. Each officer understood the gravity. A single misstep could erase or contaminate crucial evidence. As they approached a corner partially obscured by flour sacks, Denton felt an instinctive tightening in his chest. Years of investigation, decades of unanswered grief, all led to this moment. The ordinary warehouse became a chamber of suspense. Every sensory detail, musty air, cold metal, the faint stickiness of neglected surfaces heightening the tension. For the audience, the dread builds with each step deeper into the unit. The ordinary life Wade had maintained for 20 years stands in stark contrast to the dark secret concealed within. The narrative tightens, the silence amplifying every movement, until the next revelation threatens to shatter the fragile calm and expose the truth that had been waiting in shadows for far too long. Behind the stacks of decaying flour sacks, Denton's flashlight caught something that made him freeze. A patch of disturbed earth, shallow but deliberate, lay hidden in the corner, partially obscured by years of neglect. The metallic scent of the storage unit mingled with a faint, unsettling odor of soil and decay. Officers exchanged tense glances. Every practiced breath felt heavy, weighted by the years of anticipation and dread. The forensic team moved in carefully, lifting each sack, their gloves brushing over years of dust. Each movement was precise, deliberate, as if the smallest misstep could erase 2 decades of pursuit. When the earth was fully revealed, the team's silence was deafening. There, partially concealed, lay the remains of Maurine Bridger. The sight was sobering. The reality of the young woman who had vanished so many years ago finally made tangible. Her absence suddenly transformed into undeniable presence. Denton knelt, staring at the ground, the weight of relief and anguish pressing on him. Kincaid's warnings from 20 years earlier echoed in his mind. This wasn't a runaway. This was a crime that had left a mark on every corner of Charleston. The painstakingly preserved evidence, the careful notes, and the relentless pursuit of justice had led them here. Forensic confirmation came swiftly. DNA tests, cross-referenced against Maurine's familial profile, left no room for doubt. The girl who had been missing, whose life had been abruptly stolen on a quiet August night, was finally accounted for. The room seemed to exhale collectively, the years of tension cracking under the weight of truth. For the audience, the emotional impact is immediate. The stolen life, the long wait, the shattered community, and the vindication of a detective's unwavering belief converge in this moment. Denton's eyes lingered on the evidence, a silent acknowledgement that Kincaid had been right all along. Justice, delayed but not denied, had finally arrived. Wade Hatcher sat across from Detective Denton, the room silent except for the soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead. His face, a mask of bland familiarity for 20 years, offered no hint of the darkness it concealed. For 2 decades, he had walked among his neighbors, rung up nails and paint, smiled at casual greetings, an ordinary man in an ordinary town. And yet, in this moment, the ordinary mask cracked. It was a momentary impulse, he said, his voice eerily calm. No tremor, no regret, not at first. He spoke almost as if recounting a minor inconvenience, a disruption of his nightly routine. Denton felt a cold shock ripple through him. Years of careful investigation, relentless searching, and the grief of a community boiled down to a single, chillingly mundane phrase. Wade's gaze did not waver. He described the night in detail, the route he had taken, the decision to pull over when he saw Maurine walking alone. Every word dripped with the casualness of someone recounting the weather, yet each word was saturated with horror. There was no elaborate planning, no deep-seated vendetta, only an opportunistic act that stole a life, shattering a community and twisting normalcy into fear. For Denton, the confession was both a relief and a torment. Relief that the truth was finally spoken. Torment that it was so ordinary, so disturbingly human in its simplicity. The years of waiting, the cold files, the unanswered questions all converged on this moment, condensed into a single sentence, a momentary impulse. For the audience, the wait is immediate. The horror lies not in a grand scheme or theatrical cruelty, but in the terrifying truth that a neighbor, a trusted face in the community, could commit such an act and then live openly for 2 decades. The realization is visceral, binding the viewer's emotions to every word of the confession. Wade continued, his tone flat, almost rehearsed, as he explained why he had chosen the abandoned bakery storage unit. The building, tucked away behind the main bakery, had been neglected for years. He described the refrigeration units lining the walls, humming steadily through the night, drowning out any sound. In his words, the mechanical white noise was a shield, a perfect cloak for what he was about to do. He spoke of the shadows between stacks of flour sacks, the forgotten corners that no one ever checked. It was not the work of a mastermind, only a man exploiting knowledge of his environment, using ordinary, unnoticed spaces to hide extraordinary evil. Every detail he shared reinforced the disturbing simplicity of his crime. Proximity, timing, and the confidence that no one would intrude in a quiet, overlooked place. For Detective Denton, the explanation was a jarring reminder that opportunity alone had been enough. The layers of ordinary life Wade maintained, owner of a hardware store, familiar figure in the neighborhood, neighbor who waved politely, were all tools of concealment. The crime had been opportunistic, brutal, yet uncomplicated. There were no elaborate schemes, no extended planning, just a human predator who recognized a single, fleeting chance and took it without hesitation. For the audience, the tension builds with the cold practicality of his words. The calmness in Wade's voice makes the crime feel closer, more intimate, and more horrifying. A space that once seemed mundane, a storage unit, filled with flour and forgotten equipment, becomes a symbol of hidden menace, proof that evil can linger quietly in plain sight. By the end, viewers are left grappling with fear and disbelief. The crime required no grand plan, only a willingness to act when chance presented itself. The simplicity of the opportunity amplifies the horror, setting up the community's inevitable shock as the truth of his everyday presence comes into focus. News of Wade Hatcher's confession spread through Charleston like wildfire. The quiet, polite man who had rung up nails, given directions, and helped neighbors fix leaky faucets for 20 years was, in truth, a killer. The community grappled with a mixture of disbelief, anger, and sorrow. How could someone so familiar, so ordinary, harbor such darkness? Every interaction, every memory of Wade was now tainted. People replayed casual smiles, friendly greetings, and moments of trust, each recollection now shadowed by betrayal. The thought that Maurine Bridger had walked past him that night, her bright future stolen in an instant, made the violation of normalcy all the more unbearable. This was not a stranger who passed through town, but a man who had been hiding in plain sight, part of the very fabric of daily life. Families, students, and faculty wrestled with fear and anger. The hardware store, once a mundane part of routine errands, became a symbol of hidden evil. Each familiar object, shelves, tools, paint cans, was now viewed through the lens of horror. How many other ordinary faces carried the same darkness? The city's sense of safety had been irrevocably shattered. For Detective Denton, the community's reaction underscored the gravity of his task. 20 years of waiting, 20 years of unanswered questions, had brought them to this devastating truth. The confession revealed not only the crime itself but the years of hidden deception, forcing everyone to confront the fragility of trust. The cliffhanger lingers. The betrayal of normalcy. The unsettling realization that evil often walks among us unnoticed. The audience is left suspended between shock and disbelief, compelled to reflect on the terrifying intimacy of the crime and the chilling lesson that those we trust most may hide unimaginable darkness behind a calm, ordinary exterior. The courtroom was tense, every eye fixed on Wade Hatcher as the sentence was read aloud. Decades of deception, 20 years of unanswered questions, and a community's long-held fear culminated in this single moment. The judge's voice was steady, measured, but it carried the weight of history. The life taken, the grief endured, the trust shattered. Families who had suffered in silence, students who had mourned quietly, and neighbors who had unknowingly coexisted with the perpetrator watched as justice finally found its voice. Murmurs filled the room, alternating between relief, disbelief, and an unfiltered anger. It was a reminder that time could not erase pain, but the law could acknowledge it. Wade's sentence was more than punishment. It was acknowledgement, a formal recognition of the crime that had haunted Charleston for decades. Outside, reporters broadcast the news, capturing the raw emotions of a city finally given answers. The headlines carried both closure and shock. West Virginia cold case ends in conviction. Streets once filled with quiet routines now resonated with conversations about morality, trust, and the stark reality of evil hiding in ordinary places. For Detective Denton, the verdict confirmed what he had always believed. Perseverance, attention to detail, and refusal to let the case fade into obscurity had delivered justice. The community, bruised yet relieved, began a slow process of healing, each person grappling with their own mixture of sorrow, relief, and lingering disbelief. The audience is drawn into the weight of justice served after decades, a cathartic conclusion that underscores both the fragility of trust and the resilience of those who pursue truth relentlessly. At the end of this moment, before the deeper legacy unfolds, we transition to the final reflections, Maurine Bridger's words, Maurine's lasting impact, and the ultimate lessons learned. Maurine Bridger, frail but unwavering, addressed the press outside the courthouse. Her voice carried the authority of grief transformed into resolve. "We never stopped waiting," she said, eyes scanning the crowd, capturing the attention of every journalist and onlooker. "Justice is slow, but it is absolute." Those words, simple yet powerful, became the rallying cry for a community long burdened by fear and uncertainty. Her statement did more than honor Maurine. It reaffirmed the strength of persistence and faith in the systems meant to protect society. Maurine had been a constant presence from the beginning, ensuring Maurine's name never faded into obscurity. Through vigils, interviews, and the establishment of the Maurine Bridger Justice Fund, she transformed grief into action. Her efforts reminded everyone that even when the world seems indifferent, relentless determination can carve a path to truth. Maurine's own passion for forensic science added another layer to this legacy. Her dedication to justice, nurtured through years of study and a personal quest for answers, had indirectly shaped the tools that ultimately solved her disappearance. The advancements in DNA technology, the forensic techniques employed by Nova Collins, and the careful preservation of minute evidence all became testaments to Maurine's life and values. Her influence endured beyond her years, proving that a single life committed to truth and justice could ripple outward, affecting outcomes even decades later. For the audience, this section underscores a dual takeaway: the power of familial devotion and the enduring impact of a life devoted to justice. Maurine's story becomes both cautionary and inspiring, a reminder that evil can exist quietly, yet perseverance, technology, and human resolve can illuminate what was once hidden. The stage is set for the final moral and emotional reflections, tying together community lessons and the broader implications of justice. The case of Maurine Bridger leaves a haunting truth. Evil often hides behind the most ordinary faces. Wade Hatcher's unremarkable life, spanning decades of quiet integration into his community, was a stark reminder that appearances can deceive, and trust is fragile. Charleston learned that monsters are not always strangers, but sometimes neighbors, colleagues, or familiar figures who walk among us unnoticed. Yet the story also carries hope and empowerment. Technology became justice's memory, preserving the faintest trace of truth until the right moment. The tiny residue on Maurine's Celtic knot earring, overlooked for years, became the key to unmasking a killer. Science, patience, and dedication combined to deliver closure that human intuition alone could not achieve. For viewers, the lesson is clear. No crime leaves a perfect void, and the smallest detail can hold the power to expose the hidden. Maurine's life, though tragically cut short, continues to resonate. Her pursuit of justice and her careful attention to detail created ripples that eventually overcame decades of silence. Families, law enforcement, and communities are reminded that persistence matters, that the fight for truth is never truly lost, even when hope seems distant. Maurine Bridger's unwavering advocacy exemplifies the transformative power of devotion and action. Her tireless insistence that Maurine's story be remembered kept the case alive, and in turn, ensured that justice, no matter how delayed, was served. To our viewers, the story of Maurine Bridger is a call to vigilance, a reminder that darkness can be hidden in plain sight, and that persistence, science, and moral courage can bring it into the light. If you followed this story to its end, subscribe now to uncover more truths others hope remain forgotten. Don't let silence hide the lessons that demand attention. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and witness the full arc of justice.